Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Huron webcast, Groovy Game-Changing Technology at Breakthrough Beverage Group. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Afterwards, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. At that time, if you have a question, please press the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone keypad. You may also submit a written question in the lower left corner of your screen. If at any time during the conference you need to reach an operator, please press star 0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Thursday, April 19, 2018. I would now like to turn the conference over to Kyle Goodfriend, Managing Consultant at Huron. Please go ahead, sir.
Hi, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining. We'll just jump right into this. First, I want to introduce Chris Hall. He's the VP of Finance at Breakthrough Beverage Group. He was the person responsible for bringing us in and leading the project. And then myself, I've been with Huron for a couple of years, and I've been in the consulting arena for probably close to 15, and been working with this technology for probably 20 to 25 years. So we'll get into the agenda real quick, and I'm not going to read everything verbatim, so you can read that as you wish. But Chris is going to get into the introduction and of the project scope and the benefits of the implementation, and provide some feedback on things that he would be doing differently if he had it to do over again. I'm going to jump into the architecture of the application and discuss what Groovy calculations enabled us to do to produce the real-time reporting that we're seeing, and talk to some of the challenges we faced that pushed us into using Groovy, because it wasn't our first path. Then I'm going to walk through some of the examples and show you guys how it works. And then we'll finish up with an open dialogue to help you guys, or to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions and get some feedback to hopefully learn and maybe even help you with an implementation that you're doing. Real briefly, I've laid out a couple of goals, but we simply want to provide you guys with some background, the possibilities of real-time reporting that exist in PBCS, and give you the benefit of what we learned through the process of being early adopters of this technology. We want to leave you with an understanding of the possibilities, and hopefully you feel comfortable knowing that the performance on the cloud is outstanding and provides possibilities that on-prem does not currently have. And I'll be very upfront. I was not excited about going to the cloud. And after a couple of the implementations that I've done, I almost dread going back to on-prem. So the cloud there's a lot of stability, and there's a lot of features that you don't get in on-prem. At a summary level, although there were other people involved, but I was the lead architect, it was a 5 to 6 month implementation time frame. And Huron had 2 people. We had myself, and then we had another developer building this out. So this was all done in a matter of 5 to 6 months with 2 developers. Breakthrough had a little bit of a larger team. We had 4 SMEs. We had a dedicated project manager. And then we also had some involvement with IT closer to the end of the project, with getting us some of the data that we needed from all of the sources that we needed to pull the actuals from. I think the key success factors of getting this done on time was a really tight integration with finance, and Chris and his staff were literally sitting in a room with us almost every day, or at least part of the day every day, and we had direct access to them. They were able to look at things as we were building them, and we were able to bounce ideas off of each other to get even a better solution than what we originally started with. And I think that's a key to any project, is that integration and then the daily interaction. And then I think both parties had a willingness to adapt, to use the technology to its strengths, to actually accomplish some really great things. Chris, you want to introduce the Breakthrough Beverage portion?
Sure. Quick introduction. Thanks, Kyle. Again, my name is Chris Hall. I'm the VP of Financial Planning and Analysis with Breakthrough Beverage Group. Wanted to give an introduction of myself. I've In my current position with Breakthrough, I manage and coordinate the budgeting and forecasting process for the organization. as well as the internal management reporting process. And my team also administers and manages the Oracle tool that we're currently using, and we have about 70 users in the field. A little bit about Breakthrough Beverage. We're a total beverage alcohol wholesaler in the United States and Canada. A little bit about the industry. We are the middle tier in a three-tier system. So we purchase products from alcohol suppliers and manufacturers, and we sell and distribute to thousands of different customers in our markets, basically anyone with a liquor license. A little bit about Breakthrough. We're about $5 billion in sales. We sell spirits, wine, beer, and some non-alcoholic products. We carry thousands of different brands ranging from Tito's Vodka to Kendall Jackson Wine to Coors Light. And we operate currently in 14 states in the U.S. and Canada. And we have about 7,000 employees. About 2 years ago, we started this project, and the impetus for it was about 2 years ago. My old company, Wirtz Beverage, merged with another large distributor to form Breakthrough. And during this merger process, it became clear that we had a gap in terms of software and needed a new tool that our company could leverage to budget. So we developed this project goal to drive best practices and consistency in the budgeting, forecasting, and financial reporting process. We then aligned this project goal with some of our company's core pillars of success, innovation, productivity, and growth. And overall, we really just needed a new platform that all the finance folks could use, and that would capture the right level of budget detail for our national finance team. And we needed to also make sure it was a consistent and efficient process. Scalability was also hugely important, and it's very timely right now. We just actually announced a couple months ago yet another merger with another large U.S.-based alcohol distributor. Go to the next slide, Kyle. So budgeting and forecasting. When we merged a couple years ago, obviously two separate companies had very different processes. And we had a good opportunity to create a new and better process for budgeting for our company. And when looking at our old processes, some of the main differences was that we were obviously using two different tools. My prior company was using a tool called BI360, and the company we merged with was just using Excel for budgeting. So as you could imagine, we had different levels of budget detail, different methodologies of budgeting. So in our new process, leveraging Oracle, we were obviously able to have one tool for budgeting, forecasting, and reporting. We were able to drive a consistent process throughout the organization with many of the benefits you see here on this slide. So why Oracle? In the end of our process, we chose Oracle EPBCS, so the cloud version of Oracle. We went through a rigorous and lengthy RFI process. We included key shareholders on the finance and IT side in doing so. Ultimately, we chose Oracle, and we did so for several reasons. The main reason was the functionality that we saw in the demos from Oracle, and talking to some other customers which used Oracle met our needs for the core gap that we had, which was really focused on P&L budgeting. We also, looking at Oracle, they are a lead vendor in this area, and looking at the Gartner Magic Quadrant in particular, they were a leader there, which was important to us. And we thought we would have the best shot at really driving efficiencies and centralization through the process in using Oracle. And as I spoke before, scalability was really important, and using a large vendor like Oracle, who is going to be continuing to invest quite a bit in this product, we thought that was the best bet for us. So just a quick recap on the project. As Kyle mentioned, we kicked this project off in June of 2017. And we actually just finished our first annual budget process in February of 2018. So in scope, the timeline was pretty aggressive, and we're pretty happy with our choice and how the last year turned out. We saw several wins and a couple lessons learned that I wanted to review with the group. As far as wins, we had functionality in the tool, and we did a full annual budget in the tool. So full forecasting for 2017 and full annual budget for 2018, and we did it all in the tool. From my standpoint, being in a national finance role, I had a view of consolidated reporting throughout the budget process. So we had, like I said, 70 users in the field who were creating their budgets, and all along the process I had a consistent view of reporting throughout on a daily, monthly basis of what was going on in the budget. And again, consistent, rich, detailed budget data, that was definitely achieved through this process. In terms of lessons learned, I think knowing your user base is really important. We had folks in many different states in Canada doing budgets very differently. So understanding that when we built this tool was really important, and also understanding the technology level that people were accustomed to was important. I think phasing out the project, we probably could have done a little bit of a better job. We really tried to put everything in at once. So, phasing out a large project like this is really important. In terms of sourcing the data, so bringing ERP data into Oracle, we did need a level of internal IT support that was difficult at times for our project. So I think, in terms of sourcing the data, having that internal IT support was really important. UAT, so user acceptance testing. We had quite a few customized templates that Huron created for us in terms for our budgeting, and testing those. We probably could have done a little bit of a better job in terms of testing. And then just in general, realistic expectations. When you go into a project like this, you want all the functionality, you want it done very quickly, and you don't want to spend a lot of money. So just being realistic about those expectations, again, was a lesson learned. And with that, Kyle, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. And Chris is going to stay on, so if you have any questions for him at the end of this presentation, he'll be available. So we're going to get into the meat of this, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail from a technical perspective, but I did want to walk people through a high level of the application architecture, because anybody who's been through this and has used either planning or PBCS or on-prem planning will know some of the challenges that we probably had. So first off, there were a number of data sources, and we loaded data daily. That data came from Workday, obviously the users, Microsoft AX, and SAP. We had a VM, very small VM, that managed all of the automation. So it did all the daily calculations, the arcing out the backups at night, any of that administrative, repetitive processes were all done in PowerShell on that VM. One thing that was a little bit different in this project that I've had in the past is due to the inability for SAP to be able to provide restated financials after product realignments, we had to build a process to do that daily and weekly. So you'll see that there's a SQL restatement layer in there, and we chose to go with SQL rather than use data management because I know that that's going to be a question. With 3 years of history at the SKU level, we had to have it at the SKU level, and the SKU level doesn't exist in the planning application, but to restate it, we had to have it at the SKU level. So that encompassed roughly 50 million records, and the mapping had almost 2 million records. So we really thought that data management was going to struggle with that volume of data. So we built it in a SQL relational database. And I do want to emphasize that this application is, when we get into the performance and the real-time, when you see the real-time reporting, This application is big. Obviously, the 50 million records is bigger than what we had because we don't have SKU level, but we had about 30,000 products in this application, and we had, I believe there was over 100 distribution channels. So that, along with every other dimension that you typically see in these, it was a fairly large application. The other thing that complicated things was that people were entering data at a parent level. So their budget and the forecast was all preceded with a number of different ways that they could precede those scenarios. And the way people went in and updated it was they would go and they would override certain factors to get the numbers, for growth rates and prices and so on. So a lot of this was entered in at a summary level and allocated down every time somebody entered data. That gets us into some of the performance challenges. So in this application, Chris and his team wanted the ability to make a change to a product at the bottom level to a distribution channel and see it consolidated real time. They also wanted to be able to update, the workforce application, and we don't have that piece done yet, but when we finish it, what we'll have is when you update, you move somebody from Union 1 to Union 2, you'll be able to go into the P&L and actually see the real-time results. Like I said, the data forms, a lot of the data forms that are used to enter data, the users have the ability to change the data either at the bottom of the hierarchies or at summary levels of 3 different dimensions. And with a possibility of 27 million combinations, it was critical that performance was an issue, and we had to make sure that we accounted for that. Smart pushes, which are the pushes that push the reporting cube, were hitting memory limits. So there are caps, and I believe it's because it's on the cloud. They cap how much you can push on a form. So basically when the user makes a change and it pushes it and consolidates it to the reporting cube, we had some issues with the volume of data that we were trying to push. The other issue that we had was that because of the time that it would take to push that, and if you think of pushing data at a product level for all the distribution channels, and let's say you have 200 products on a form, it took a long time, and users didn't want to wait for that process to run. So we were running it in the background. And what we found is that if it took 2 minutes, sometimes users were going over and refreshing reports and they weren't seeing the results. The other issues is if it failed due to those memory limitations, the users wouldn't know it. The other challenge that we had was anytime, before we implemented Groovy, anytime people wanted to see consolidated results at the financials, including the gross profit model and the workforce model, the consolidations took a couple hours to get that done, so there was a delay. The other challenge that we had that Groovy solved for us, which we'll get into later, which I'm extremely happy about, is there were business rules required or logic required on input of the data that they didn't want to violate. So as an example, if you phased a month and you increased January by 10, you had to decrease the other months by 10, so you couldn't change the total year. So that was a challenge because without Groovy, you can submit pretty much whatever you want, and you can color code it and tell people it's wrong, but it doesn't stop them from doing it. There were many forms where users wanted to be able to see if the lines on the forms were actually changed from the seeded amounts. So we were able to do that with Groovy that we wouldn't have been able to do without it. And there were dependencies that existed on some forms. So for example, if you were on a form and you entered in 100 units, but you didn't enter a price, you would get no revenue for that. So we implemented some things to account for that. So if somebody entered some information into a form and they missed a piece, it would tell them that there were other things required, otherwise their budget was going to be incomplete. So we didn't originally start with Groovy. Groovy was introduced in June, so about the inception of the project is when the Groovy calculations were released, and they were new to everybody. They are available in ePBCS and PBCS plus one. So if you're looking at PBCS, you won't have the functionality that we're going to talk about today. And other than a few bugs that we're working through with development, the functionality works exactly the same in Excel as it does in the web browsers. So that's another nice thing about this, is that you're not pigeonholing somebody into using one entry method over another, because most people like to use Excel. So we had a lot of success with that. A couple key functional highlights. We can interact with forms before users save the data. So if they enter inaccurate data or that violate certain rules, we can stop any data from being saved. We can also isolate calculations on a form and run only the logic that applies to what's been changed. So if you have 100 products on a form and you change 2, we're able to only calculate those 2 products and then synchronize those with the reporting tubes, which is one of the reasons it makes this so much faster. There are other things that you can do with this, and we'll get into some of these, but things like initiating smart pushes, notifications to the user. We talked about the validation. And also, for those of you who develop in this, you can now synchronize data from ASO to a BSO cube, which if you're on the finance side, you probably don't know what that means, but the technical people that are on the call, that's a huge benefit. And it's really the missing piece that we didn't have that enables us to be able to do this real-time reporting. So what is Groovy? If you go out to their website, this is pretty much what they tell you. And I'll kind of summarize this to basically say that it provides developers with the ability to do more complex tasks with less effort. So Groovy sits on top of Java, and I am not a Java programmer. But you can have one line of Groovy that might replace 10, 50, 100 lines of Java. So it basically gives you the ability to be much more productive and efficient in building some of this stuff. And we've talked about some of the improvements, but we'll highlight them here. So the proactive data validation, selective business rule logic, the proactive user input, and also the selective data synchronization. The other thing that we haven't talked about is you have access to a lot of the Java functions. So there's a lot of things that you can do that you couldn't do in a business rule in Java. You have a lot of string functions. You have a lot of data manipulation functions that you never had before. You have mapping functions that you didn't have. There's a whole plethora of things that you have that you wouldn't have had prior to Groovy. We talked about real-time consolidation, which we're going to demo. The traffic lighting, the level of sophistication that you can add to the traffic lighting is really completely up to your imagination. So you're not stuck with the default traffic lighting that comes inside of the planning in the form development. The other thing is custom logging, which is great when you're debugging and when you're looking at times of calculations and you're finding errors. You can execute logic directly on ASO. So this is something that's completely new in our world, is that there's a lot of things that you can't do in the reporting cube, the ASO cube, that you can now basically do in Groovy that you could never do before. And then custom errors. You have the ability to create errors in multiple languages, multiple errors, period, but those errors can be converted into different languages. So whatever the locale is that the person is using, when they connect to planning, they'll get the appropriate error. So the real-time reporting. So what we're going to do is I'm going to jump into some of the reporting and walk you through some of this. And some of it isn't flashy, but it will show you that it works. So Chris, I'm going to lean on you. I'm going to make sure that you can see this.
Yes, you can see it.
Okay, awesome. So there's a couple of forms that I'm going to show you, and I'll also show you the retrieves that the data has changed. So if I go over to Excel and I refresh this data, and I'm not going to refresh every one because I did that before we started, but I have this little validation sheet that will show you the differences. So if you look at these top pieces right here, you'll see that they all validate. And I refresh the other two, so now everything is correct. So if I go over to the form, and the way this works is you can enter in an override for the average unit price or a growth rate. So I'm just going to do something crazy to make sure that we see a large change. So I'm going to override the unit price, which you can see right here is 41, 90, 305. I'm going to just override those with 3,000. So when I save this form, and if we look at the logs, the bulk of the time of this form saving is actually the refresh because of the 30,000 products in the rows. The actual time that it took to do all the work is really only probably 2 or 3 seconds. So really what this did is it did allocations, it did all the calculations, you see the new unit prices, and then if we go over to Excel and we do retrieve, so if we retrieve on the reporting cube for gross profit where we've actually got all the details, so we've got channel, products, and order method, and I refresh this, you'll see data that's changed. So now there's some validation errors. The fin cube, you'll notice that this has cost center, which the other model didn't, and it doesn't have the product, the channel, and the delivery method. So if I refresh this and refresh the reporting cube for fin, and I go over the validation, you'll see that it's all accurate, or it's all validated. So what this did is it consolidated the entire database for Company North Illinois by material group, by channel, and the 30,000 products, and it moved it to the financial cube at a consolidated level in about a second and a half. That right there is something that we have never had prior to Groovy. So this is the aspect of this technology and what it delivers to you that is just mind-blowing to me that we have. It doesn't make Essbase faster. It doesn't make planning faster, but you have so much control over only pushing certain things and the changes that you can control it, and it just, the performance is stupid fast. So there's a couple other forms that we can go into, and I can show you just to, prove that it works. So if I go into the spend form and I type in $100,000, and I save this, we'll see the same result. So all these tabs are all different databases, and they're all refreshed, and you see that it validates. So again, within seconds, it consolidated all the products, all the material groups, and all the delivery methods all the way up and moved it to the financial application. Again, never had this functionality before. So the other thing, and I could go through more examples of this, but honestly, they're all the same, and you can see that it works, so I'm not going to bore you with some of this. But there are other things that make a huge impact. And I'll go back to the presentation real quick. So the deck that we have actually explains what just happened, and you guys will all have this. But it basically, on the form saved, you validated the business logic, you ran the execution of the business logic, you did all the data maps, and you moved all the data, and this also is doing currency conversion as well. And this just kind of maps out the differences between the applications, so you get the idea of the detail and the consolidated levels. I've also put together some slides for you that actually, this is a real-time example of the breakthrough application, and this just shows you the difference in these steps that we just went through when the form saved. So prior to the Groovy, it was 26 seconds to execute the business logic. It was under a second with Groovy. The Smart Push, which is the synchronization to the reporting cube, went from almost 15 seconds to 1 second. And then this is the astonishing thing. The consolidation went from 83 seconds to 0.2 seconds. So you can see there's a drastic difference in this. And I mentioned to you that the difference in the time that you saw the form refresh and the actual execution time, this is an example of one of the logs. So you'll see that right here, this total time for the data push took 1.5 seconds. This total time to consolidate and copy to the Fin application took 0.273 seconds. So the total time was 1.7, and it might take 5 seconds for the form to refresh, but the actual logic is very, very quick. The other thing that I think is completely underestimated when people talk about Groovy, and the performance is fantastic, but it's also the ability to interact with the user before they save data to help them not make issues or data issues and enter data that's invalid. And you're never going to be able to solve the problem with somebody entering a correct budget, but there are certain things that you can validate and force people to fix so that you don't find them later in the process. And the example that I had is if you put in units but you don't put in a price, you don't get any revenue. And you don't want to find that out at the end of your budget process when you're actually looking at actuals and you realize that you screwed up the budget. So there's a lot of benefits to this. It improves the accuracy of the data input. It reduces fire drills at the end of the budgeting cycle. And I've been in finance, so I know what that's like. It reduces the frustration for the users. It minimizes user questions and help desk tickets because, you know, as Chris has probably seen, some of his guys are getting phone calls that the system's broke or it doesn't work. And really, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, but somebody didn't enter data in the right place. And so if you don't enter a currency rate, you're not going to get a currency value for a converted currency in the report. It puts data validation in the hands of the users, and it creates a proactive correction. The other thing that it's great at is it acts as a training vehicle. So when somebody enters something that's invalid and they get a notice that says it's wrong, you're training them that there are certain key components of the budget that they have to input. And the increased business logic to the user, there's a lot less transparency, so they know more of what's going on. So I'm going to go through a few examples. I'm going to go back to this spend form, and this isn't something that actually exists in the breakthrough application, but one rule that I put in here is that the supplier commit has a threshold. So if I put in 20,000 here and I save this form, it's going to be fine. If I put in 60,000 and I try to save this form, it still worked. I was expecting that to not work. So let's go to a different form. We're going to go to the phasing form. So in this phasing form, the way this works is you've got data over here. These are the seeded amounts, or actually they're the actual amount. So if somebody wants to change the data, so I'm going to change this line. So there's 156 in January and 360 units in February. So if I go and make this a -10, and I want to decrease that by 10, and I try to save this, it's going to come back and tell me that that's invalid because the net change has to be 0. So if I put my cursor over the cell, I actually get a tooltip, and it tells me this cell has been modified. Adjustments must have a full year impact, or must not have a full year impact. So currently the data is -0. So if I go in here and I put a 5 in the next cell and a 5 in March, and I save it, it puts those adjustments into the data. So now if I scroll over, these numbers change slightly. The other thing that we have in here is if I want to say I want this to go negative, I want to decrease the units by 300 and move those to February. If I try to save this, it's going to tell me that there's an error. And when I put my cursor over this, it's going to tell me why. Basically what I'm saying is that you modify this number, and because you decreased it by 300, and the number right now is 146, it's actually going to make it a negative 154, and you can't have negative units in a month. So these are just some examples. I mean, we've got tons more, but this is just kind of a level of sophistication that you now have. These numbers aren't saved to the database. They didn't impact the numbers that are over here. Nothing has changed in the database, so it forces the user to actually make correct. Again, you're never going to make somebody enter in a correct budget, but this will get them to at least adhere to some of the things that are common and some of the violations that you don't want to happen. So if you think of workforce, you could say, I don't want the person to be terminated before they're hired. If they're set to a union, maybe you don't want them to have a raise percentage because it's built into the logic that they'll get a certain percentage, every year. So it's totally limited to your imagination and to your requirements and needs. There's nothing that I've come across that I can't do now that I have this technology available to me. So if I go back over to the presentation, we're going to try to keep this to 35 minutes, and I'm pretty close. So I think, Amy and Chris, if you guys are okay, let's open this up for questions.
Sure, sounds good.
So moderator, can you open this up for questions, please?
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to register a question, please press the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a tone prompt to acknowledge your request. If your question has been answered and you would like to withdraw your registration, please press the 1 followed by the 3. And if you're using a speakerphone, please lift your handset before answering your request. Again, ladies and gentlemen, to ask any questions over the phone line, it is the 1-4. You may also submit a written question in the lower left corner of your screen.
So while we're waiting on some questions to come up, I do want to highlight a couple things. This is just a personal note that if you want to get in touch with me, you can obviously get in touch with me through Huron, but I also have a blog with a lot of information about this technology as I'm learning it to share with the people that are doing the development and the build. So you're more than welcome to go out there and ask me questions and see what's out there, and hopefully you get some benefit from it. The other thing, too, while we're answering some questions is the list on the screen right now includes all of the future events in the near term for Huron. And I'll personally note that the Kscope, if anybody's thinking of going to Kscope, it's a great conference. I love going to it. I've actually got 2 presentations this year that I'm going to be presenting on this topic. So would love to see you guys there.
Hey, Kyle. I have a question from the chat. They were wondering if any problems were experienced with Groovy as an early adopter. I don't know if Kyle or Chris should answer that one.
I think we probably both could because we both had some pain with it.
Yeah.
The biggest challenge that we've had so far is that there are a couple things that don't translate into Excel. So there is some of the validation and some of the traffic lighting doesn't translate into Excel. So we've had to have users go to the web for certain functionality. I would say it's an inconvenience and a frustration, but it certainly hasn't gotten to the point where it's pushed us away from using this technology. And Chris, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's what I was going to bring up. And from a user perspective, in my position and my team, we're trying to make sure that users are using the tool correctly and also training these users. And from a training perspective, it's really difficult when you say, hey, I have this budget template, but you can only use it on the web. You can't use it in SmartView. And a lot of the users we have for budgeting, they're doing everything in Excel, everything in SmartView. So it's definitely an inconvenience and a training issue, because doing things on the web and on SmartView are a little bit different in terms of submitting data. So I agree with Kyle's example.
Great, thanks, guys.
I do apologize. We have a few questions over the phone line.
Great, thanks, Manny.
Our first question over the phone line comes from the line of Mike from Black Hill Corp. Please go ahead.
Hi, guys. Thanks for this presentation. It's very helpful. You mentioned that you can execute calculation logic in ASO cubes. And I'm just curious, does that actually run, there are a couple specific command or calculations called execute calculation or execute allocation that are specific syntax that you can run. Does it run either of those, or is this a brand new type of syntax that is beyond either execute calculation or execute allocation?
So it does not execute those. Basically what you have the ability to do is you've got two different methods of grid builders. So you can actually build a grid, and I believe the limit is like something like 500,000 cells in a grid. So you can literally build a grid almost like you would with with Excel, like a SmartView ad hoc retrieve. And the way we're moving the data from ASO to BSO is we're basically creating a grid that's connected at a total level from the ASO cube on the GP side, and then another one that's connected to the FIN application, and then we're basically copying the data from one grid to another, like you would do if you did it manually, and then we're submitting it. So that's how we're getting around eliminating the need to do any of these consolidations, and where we're getting some of these time improvements. The other thing that we have done, and we haven't done it a lot at Breakthrough, but we have another client that we actually don't even use BSO. The only thing we use is ASO, and then you basically, like a currency conversion, you can pull in a grid for the currency tables, and then when somebody submits the data form that they're on, we're actually using Groovy to do data map lookups and do the calculations, and then submit a grid that the user doesn't even see. So you could do the same thing with logic. I mean, allocations, I haven't done that, but some of my coworkers have, and they've done it completely without any BSO or ASO logic. And they've told me it's faster. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next question over the phone line comes from the line of Joe from Huron. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my first question is on the maintenance. So between for the client, it's like what type of resource do they need to maintain this technology? Do they need to go through some separate training to learn how to use Groovy, or is this a special skill set that we would want to find?
And Chris can add to this, but I would say that I didn't know Groovy before I did this, so I learned it as I needed it. And I think that somebody that has an aptitude for technology will probably pick up 80% of it relatively quick, or 20% of it relatively quickly. That'll do 80 to 90% of what they want. And then they would have to probably deep dive and spend a little bit more time to do some of the more advanced things. But to me, again, I didn't grow up on the technology side, but to me, if I see an example, it's no different than a calc script. If I see it, I can adjust to it. And there's so much out there on Google, on the web that you can find to help educate yourself. So I would say that you definitely need a different skill set, but I wouldn't say that you need an expert in Groovy or Java to do this.
Okay. And then my next question is there any EPBCS module functionality that you were able to leverage to initiate or to assist with the Groovy calculations?
No, I don't. We didn't use a ton of the modules in this design, but I don't believe that there's anything right now that's using Groovy calculation. So, it would be probably similar to what you've experienced, where if you want to do this real-time reporting, it's something that you would have to build on top of what's already there.
Okay. And you said that the main limitation between the push between BSO and ASO was a size limit and such, or was it time?
No, it was, so the limit is, I believe it's 500,000 cells. We have not hit that limit. I mean, we had no issue with that.
Okay. All right.
And if you do, if you do, we have a Groovy calculation that pushes all the companies and syncs everything. And what we've done is just basically, done an I-descendant on entity, and then we've looped through and created basically a grid for each company, submitted it, recreated the grid, submit, and we looped through kind of like what, a BSO calculation would do.
Yeah. So it's looping through each and every time. Okay.
Yes, it can.
And how long is it? How long is that taking? A full push?
It was, I think, 14, 15 seconds.
Wow.
As opposed to 2-3 hours to do the consolidation.
Yeah. Not even enough time for a hot pocket.
No, it's stupid quick. Yeah. It's really impressive. It's exciting. Like I joke with people, I like doing this stuff, but this is pretty cool, and this is the first time I've been really excited since maybe ASO was released. I think it's that much of a game changer that it's going to impact a lot of things.
And I could tell you from a user perspective, we debriefed after we finished this first annual budget. The number one thing that the user said, or the user's complaint basically was, hey, I got to get in touch with somebody when I want this to push to the P&L. I want this real time. So, to Kyle's point, it is basically real time, and also you don't have to have someone on your staff run a full consolidation, because you're at the mercy of that person also to kick a job off just so somebody could get a budget update.
Yeah, that's a big win. All right, thanks, guys.
And our last question over the phone line comes from the line of Patrick from Huron. Please go ahead.
Hey, Kyle. Great job on putting this together. My question is, how would you recommend we phase a project where we're moving someone from an old Hyperion planning system with just regular calc scripts to sort of a cloud with Groovy solution?
I don't know if I would do it I guess it depends on the timing and what the expectations are, but my preference would be if you're going to be updating calculations anyway to do the move, and it's not just a kind of a lift and shift, I would say that you would just do it as you rebuild things. You can take the calc scripts that you have and then embed those in a loop that goes through the data grid and says, I only want to, run it on the months and the rows that have been changed. So really the only thing you're doing is you're taking the calculation script that you already have, and then you're dynamically basically generating the fixed statement. So the calculations themselves, it's exactly the same. All you're doing is going to embed that into a Groovy calculation, and then you're going to change, instead of doing I-descendants or at relative of product, you're just going to, put the products in that have changed through a variable. So I don't think there would be a ton of effort once you're familiar with how it works to really change, all of the things as you go.
Okay.
I don't think it's so different that it would be two phases.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hey, Kyle, I think we have time for one more question. So from the chat, someone is asking, what is the PBCS +1 platform you mentioned?
So the way it's been educated to me is that you have PBCS, which is your 3 plan types with 4 ASO reporting applications on top of it. PBCS is that plus, the specific modules, the workforce, the strategic modeling, project, and CapEx, and I think that's it. The PBCS plus 1 is basically something that, again, I'm hoping I'm getting this right, but this is the way development explained it to me, was that it's PBCS, and then if you just want one module, you don't have to pay for the entire ePBCS platform. So you can say, I want PBCS, but I just want to use Workforce. Or I want PBCS, but I want 2 of them. So I want, instead of 3 of the custom plan types, I want 6 custom plan types. So you're basically getting 2 pods kind of merged together in one. And I think the price point is about in the middle. So if you do basically 2 PBCS pods, or you do a 1 PBCS with one of the modules, then you get Groovy with it. It's opened up. Do we have any more?
Thank you, Kyle and Chris. I do not have any more questions from the chat window.
Thank you.
And there are no further phone questions at this time.
Okay, thank you guys for participating. And Amy, if you want to elaborate, there's going to be some communication after this to, I think, be able to see the recording.
Yes, please keep a lookout for a follow-up email from Huron with a link to view the recording from today's session.
Thanks, everybody, for participating.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the conference call for today. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect your lines.